Hello everyone, my name is Hamza, and being here, telling you this is perhaps one of the most unexpected and difficult things I've ever done. But something inside me tells me I need to speak up. I need to share this story with you. From a very young age, I wasn't just a Muslim. I was the example, the role model. That child the mosque elders praised, pointed to proudly and said, "Be like him." Before my voice even deepened, I had already memorized entire passages of the Quran, texts many men spend their lives trying to memorize. I clearly remember the firm handshakes, the respectful looks. All of that shaped my identity. I wore that admiration like armor. Inside my home, there was no room for doubt or choice. Faith was the foundation, the floor, the ceiling. My father was a strict man of few words, but his silence was more powerful than any sermon. My mother was always quiet, almost invisible, as if she had forgotten the sound of her own voice. The routine was sacred. 5 prayers a day, the smell of burning incense in the air, and verses from the Quran echoing through the rooms of the house like constant background music. At 19, I was already teaching. I taught in my immaculate white robe, not just out of tradition. It was a symbol of the purity I believed I represented. I never questioned anything. I never thought of doubting. Questioning, for me, wasn't just a rebellion against religion. It was turning my back on my father, my family, everything I was. But that's when something began to shatter. And it wasn't with a scandal, nor with a public crisis. It was with the sweet, innocent voice of a child. Bilal was one of my students, a curious little boy, always attentive, with eyes that seemed to see beyond what was being said. We were in a regular class discussing Surah An-Nisa when he raised his hand. At-Qadri, he said, calling me with the respect one gives to a teacher. "Why does Allah allow men to beat their wives?" At that moment, everything inside me froze. Verse 4:34. A passage I had recited countless times without ever really facing it. I had never let its words truly hit me. All eyes in the room turned to me. I, the teacher, the role model, had to answer. And I did, automatically. I gave the explanation I'd been taught like a robot. "It's symbolic, Bilal. It's not meant to hurt. It's just a touch, and only in cases of serious disobedience." But as soon as those words left my mouth, something inside me snapped. A void opened. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in my room, the Quran open on my lap, and reread the verse countless times. I searched for translations, commentaries, interpretations. I desperately wanted to find another explanation, but she didn't come. In every version, the meaning was the same. Direct, raw. The permission for aggression was there, explicit. And for the first time in my life, I trembled. My fingers were sweating, my heart racing. I looked up and a small, almost whispered question escaped my lips. Does this really come from God? At that moment, a crack appeared. Tiny, but deep. I knew deep down that something was wrong. And the scariest thing wasn't the doubt. It was the fact that deep down, I already knew the answer. And there was no more pretending. That night, sleep simply wouldn't come. But it wasn't ordinary insomnia. It was as if something inside me had been ripped out, leaving me in pieces. I tossed and turned for hours, my body exhausted, but my mind on fire, burning with questions I could no longer ignore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Arabic verses dancing like shadows, and Bilal's face, his confused, pure gaze, wouldn't leave my mind. The doubts, which had previously been only timid whispers deep within my soul, now screamed. They screamed loudly. It seemed I had discovered poison hidden within the book I had always believed to be the purest word of God. In an attempt to free myself from that agony, I stood up, performed my ablutions, and knelt on the prayer mat. But everything seemed empty. My words bounced off the walls and back as if God had gone silent. I felt afraid. I thought perhaps it was an attack from Satan, a trial. So I threw myself even deeper into devotion. I fasted for days on end, seeking purification. Pray harder, I told myself. I pressed my forehead against the ground so hard I could barely feel my face. But nothing. The peace that had once enveloped me like a blanket was gone. A few days passed, maybe a week. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase. I returned to my office, opened my books, and forced myself to prepare for class as I always had. I clung to the routine like someone trying to stay afloat in a shipwreck. But then, by chance, or perhaps not by chance, my eyes fell on another verse. Surah At-Tawbah 9:29. Fight those who disbelieve in Allah until they submit and pay the jizya with humiliation. My heart stopped. A chill ran through me. Was this justice? Was this God's mercy? Suddenly, the face of Mrs. Haddad, our Christian neighbor, came to mind. Always so kind, always giving us cookies at Easter. I remembered Daniel, my friend from school, who once took off his own coat to warm me when I was shivering. These were the people I was supposed to fight, subdue. Something broke inside me. I went back to class, tried to teach as if nothing was happening. But the moment I got to that verse, my mouth opened and nothing came out. I mumbled a vague explanation and moved on. My heart was no longer there. My mind, my faith, everything seemed distant, as if I were but a shadow of my former self. And then it happened. Not a breakdown, not a scandal, but something much quieter. A door inside me, heavy, rusted, closed, slowly, final, as if I'd been locked out of the only place I knew as home. And the worst part is, it wasn't my choice. I didn't want to sin. I didn't want to live in the world. I just wanted the truth. I just wanted to know the real God. But the deeper I dug, the more I saw that the foundations of my world were cracked, and I could no longer support that weight alone. The nights became my hiding place and my torment. I waited for the whole house to sleep, waited for silence to spread through the hallways, and there, in the darkness of my room, I began something new. I began to search, truly, no longer to confirm what I already believed, but to find what my heart cried out for, the true God. In the silent early mornings, when everyone else was asleep, my phone, with the brightness set to low, became my window to a world I dared not face in the light of day. Every open tab was a secret transgression. I used incognito mode, clearing my history every few minutes. My heart beat faster, fearing my father would open the door at any moment. I started reading testimonies from ex-Muslims. Then came the videos, the testimonies. And for the first time in my life, I saw my pain reflected in other people's eyes. The same anguish, the same emptiness, the same feeling of betraying everything and everyone you've ever loved. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't crazy. And most importantly, I wasn't alone. It was one random morning, still in bed, my eyes burning from lack of sleep and the blue light of the screen, that I came across a video. The title caught my attention. Former Quran teacher shares his story. My finger hesitated in midair. I knew if I clicked, there would be no going back, but I did. And that click changed everything. The man in the video, he could have been my brother. He had the same features, the same beard, the same way of speaking. He quoted the same verses I taught every day. It was as if I were watching a future version of myself, only free. He described with a pain that was my own, the same unanswered questions, the same sleepless nights, the same confusion. And then he said something that pierced my soul like an arrow. I didn't leave Islam because I hated God. I left because I loved truth more than tradition. I paused the video. The sentence remained there, suspended in the room like a living presence. My entire body trembled. My hands lost their strength and the phone slipped, falling onto the bed. That night, something in me gave way. I picked up the Quran that always sat beside my bed, not to read it, but to push it away. For the first time, without rituals, without rehearsed words, without Arabic, I spoke to God. I whispered, quietly, almost afraid of being heard. God, if you're real, if you're really the truth, then show me. I don't care what I'll lose. I just want to know you. And then came silence, but not an empty silence. It was the kind of silence that speaks, a silence that penetrates, a silence that seemed to say, I heard. God answered, not with a vision, nor with thunder, but with a brutal absence of all that was false. The ground I had stood on disappeared, and I was left naked inside. The following days were like walking inside an echo. On the outside, everything was the same. I still woke up for Fajr, still went to the mosque, still led prayers. I still taught children to pronounce verses that now burned my throat. But inside, I was at war. It was like wearing a garment that no longer fit, like a tight mask that hurt my face. I recited the verses with my lips, but my soul screamed silently. Words that had once soothed me now sounded like riddles, or worse, like wounds reopened every day. The faith that had once sustained me now crushed me. And yet, even in that inner chaos, I felt, deep down, that something was moving. A silent, patient presence, like someone watching from a distance, waiting to be noticed. And I wanted to notice him, more than anything. That melody that once made me levitate, the beauty of the Quran's recitation, now seemed like a mournful lament, almost as if each verse carried a funereal weight. Little by little, I began to withdraw. I stopped going to the Friday khutbahs, those sermons that once nourished me. I always made up an excuse, a headache, a cold, anything that would free me from the watchful eye of the community. The truth is, I couldn't pretend anymore. Everything felt empty. The words that once moved me now echoed like memorized speeches, repeated soullessly. I locked myself away. I spent most of my days secluded in my room, avoiding even my father's gaze. But he noticed. He always noticed. One night during dinner, he put down his cutlery, looked at me with that serious look in his eyes, and said in a firm voice, "You're losing your mind, Hamza. Maybe you're in trouble with the jinn." He didn't say it sarcastically. He was being genuinely serious. To him, my inner struggle could only be explained as a demonic spiritual attack. Because in the world I grew up in, questioning one's faith wasn't a natural process of the human soul. It was possession. It was a disease. But I knew I wasn't a jinn. My war wasn't with an invisible spirit. It was with the truth. And that truth, harsh, disconcerting, was unraveling me, one piece at a time. And while the outside world still saw me as an example, a pillar of faith, inside I was crumbling. One morning, still locked in my room, unable to repeat the rituals, a new curiosity took hold of me. Almost without thinking, I typed in the address of a Christian forum. I don't even know why. I wasn't looking for Jesus. I wasn't even considering abandoning Islam. In fact, if someone had told me I was about to become interested in Christianity, I would have laughed. From an early age, I learned that Christians were the people of the book. Yes, but a corrupt, lost, cursed people. People we should tolerate, at best, with pity. But as I scrolled through that forum, something unexpected stopped me. It wasn't theology. It wasn't debates about doctrine. It was the tone. There was tenderness. There was someone there on the other side writing about a God who wasn't just a distant authority, but a father. A God who called, who loved, who engaged with his creatures. And then right in the middle of a conversation, I read a sentence that broke me. Jesus doesn't want slaves. He wants children. I stopped. My eyes returned to that sentence more than once, twice, 10 times. Children. That word seemed out of place in my world. I, Hamza, had always been taught that being an abbot, a servant of Allah, was the most honorable position a man could hold. The relationship with God was one of master and slave, obedience, fear, duty. There was no room for intimacy. There was no room for love. But what if there was something beyond? That word, children, broke a dam inside me. A torrent of questions I'd been stifling for years finally burst forth. Why was I told that God was unknowable, unattainable, a mystery not to be understood? Why were we taught not to question, as if doubt itself were a sin? Why did the prophet marry a 9-year-old girl? Why was the penalty for apostasy death? Why was paradise described as having so many physical pleasures and so little about the presence of God? The questions came like an avalanche, each one heavier, more forbidden, more dangerous. And then one night, with my hands shaking, my heart pounding, I committed what, for the rest of my life, would have been the worst of sins. I opened an online Bible. Without knowing why, my fingers led me straight to the Gospel of John. I had no plan. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I began to read. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. There was something there. Something in that cadence, in that almost supernatural poetry, struck me in a way no sacred text ever had. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a threat. It was a mystery. And I continued, like someone walking toward a light they don't understand but can't ignore. Then I came to the sentence that turned my life upside down. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. At that moment I stopped. It was as if the air had been knocked from my lungs. My eyes, without my order, filled with tears. My hands trembled. I repeated those words quietly to the empty room, just to make sure they were real. God became flesh. It made no theological sense. Everything inside me, trained for years to see God as unattainable, impersonal, wanted to reject that idea. But another part, deeper, more ancient perhaps, ignited. A flame I didn't even know existed. And in that state of total physical and emotional exhaustion, I fell asleep. But that night I dreamed. And it wasn't just any dream, one of those disconnected ones that disappear at dawn. It was real, lucid. I was standing in a white room, completely white. No walls, no ceiling. Only light. A soft but infinite light. And in the center was a chair. In it a man, also dressed in white, sat. He radiated something I couldn't name. But it was peace. It was love. It was truth. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. But his gaze wasn't like my father's, full of demands, nor like the mosque elders measuring my obedience. That gaze was different. He saw me, really. Not the teacher, not the role model, not the exemplary Muslim. He saw that Hamza, the soul behind the facade. Then slowly, he stood up and walked toward me. He stopped in front of me, looked into my eyes and said, in a voice as gentle as it was powerful, "Hamza, I know you." That was all. But that was all. I woke up gasping, sobbing, breathless, with my pillow wet with tears. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt seen, known, loved. That dream became my most sacred treasure, and also my greatest burden. How could I tell anyone? My parents would see it as proof of demonic possession. For my brothers, it would be a source of shame. Not even Ahmed, my best friend since childhood, would be safe. He was even more devout than I. What if he reported me? He would believe he was saving my soul. So I kept quiet. Silence became my companion, and my room, my hiding place. It was there that I fought my invisible war every night. 4 walls that protected me and imprisoned me. But it was there, in that hiding place that God began to rebuild me. I continued reading the Bible in secret. I downloaded sermons and listened to them with headphones tucked under the covers, like a smuggler of faith. I listened to testimonies from ex-Muslims, ex-religious people who, like me, were desperate for truth. Every story I heard seemed to hold a mirror up to me. Each word pulled me closer to something, or rather to somebody. The more I discovered about this Jesus of the Gospels, the more my inner structure began to crumble. It wasn't just Islam that was being challenged. It was my entire identity, my pride in being Hafi, the reverence I received from the community, my fear of disappointing my family. Everything that had once seemed sacred now trembled like a house of cards. One particularly heavy night, the weight of loneliness and confusion became unbearable. I couldn't bear the internal struggle anymore. Kneeling and repeating the formal prayers felt empty, false, as if each word came from a mouth that was no longer mine. So I did something I'd never done before. I grabbed a loose sheet of paper from my notebook and a pen. I locked the door, sat down at my desk and began to write. It wasn't a prayer like the ones I'd learned to recite. It was a letter. A raw, direct, almost desperate letter. I wrote, "If you are the God of the Bible, the God who became flesh, the God who knows my name, then please, I want to know you." My hands were shaking. The words seemed to come out on their own, as if they'd been trapped inside me for years and now finally found a way out. I don't want to follow rules just out of fear anymore. I don't want to live by empty rituals. I want truth, but I'm scared, very scared. I paused for a moment, tears falling straight onto the paper, smudging the ink. I'm afraid of losing my family, of being rejected. They're all I have. But still, show me what to do. Give me a sign, please. I finished the letter with the pen pressed against the paper, almost tearing it. Then I folded it and hid it in the back of an old book, which I knew no one else touched. The answer came sooner than I expected. That same week, on one of those nights when I was diving into the depths of the internet with my phone's brightness turned down to low and my heart pounding, I came across an image of an older man. White beard, steady, serene gaze. The caption read, "Former Imam Fiends Christ." The word magnet made me freeze. He wasn't just anyone. He was a leader, a man of prestige in the religious world. This aroused in me a mixture of respect and curiosity that was stronger than fear. I clicked. He spoke calmly, but with an authority that pierced through the screen. And then he said something that broke me inside. The Jesus of the Bible is not just another prophet. He is God in the flesh, and he came to set the captives free. Captives. That word exploded inside me like a revelation. I wasn't just a faithful devotee. I was a captive, a prisoner of fear, a hostage to expectation, a slave to the applause of my community, the approval of my father, the traditions of my culture. I was trapped, and for the first time my pain had a name. And with that name, there came a cry from within the soul. I want to be free, but I didn't know what this freedom felt like. It was like a distant country, with a language I'd never learned. Even so, I knew I had to take a step, any step. I began a different kind of fast, not from food but from routine. I stayed away from the mosque. I stayed away from group prayers. I stayed away from the Arabic words that had once been my spiritual sustenance, but now left me empty inside. Nobody knew. Nobody could know. I kept wearing the same mask. I kept pretending. And every day it felt heavier, tighter, as if it was suffocating me from within. I invented pains, illnesses, excuses. Every lie I told ate away at me, not just with guilt, but with the contrast between what I was experiencing and what I was discovering. I vividly remember one morning. I was in the hallway, about to leave for class, and my father put his hand on my shoulder. He looked at me with eyes filled with quiet pride, the kind of pride that has sustained me throughout my life. "You are the pride of our family, Hamza," he said. "An example of righteousness, a true man of God." Those words, which had once filled me with honor that day, tore me apart. It was as if he were praising a statue, an empty idol. I was no longer that. I no longer knew who I was, but deep down, I already knew who I was approaching. "You are my pride, Hamza. You are the light of our name." My father's words stuck in my mind like a seal, a weight. They sounded like a compliment, but also like a sentence, because I knew that if he discovered the truth, that the son he trusted so much, the one who carried on the family name with honor, was questioning the faith that defined our existence, I would cease to be a son. It would become a shame, a stain to be erased from our history. The tension inside me was building like an electrical wire stretched to its maximum, ready to snap at any moment. And then came that afternoon. The house was strangely silent. No one, just me. Outside, I heard the call to afternoon prayer echoing from the neighborhood mosque, that sound that always made me get up almost instinctively. But this time, I didn't move. I stood there, my heart pounding. It was as if an invisible force held me in place, and suddenly the desire to know more, to go further, to discover who this Jesus was that troubled me, became stronger than the fear. I grabbed my phone, still hidden as always. The brightness was on low, the earbuds tossed aside. I opened the Bible app. My fingers knew exactly where to go. John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It was as if the words had a life of their own. They leapt from the screen straight into my chest. That wasn't an invitation. It was an absolute affirmation, a line drawn on the ground. In my upbringing, Jesus was always one prophet among many. Respected, yes, but never exclusive. But there, he left no room for ambiguity. He claimed to be the single path. My mind screamed in protest. It was an insult to what I had been taught since childhood. But my heart knew. I knew there was something different there, something that called to me. I read the verse again and again. With each reading, a part of old Hamza broke, and something new, something I didn't yet understand, began to form in its place. I was so immersed in that sentence, so lost in it, that I lost track of time. The world around me disappeared. It was just me and those words, until the front gate slammed. High, dry, fast. My whole body went on alert. It was my younger brother. He had come home early from school. In a desperate reflex, I stuffed my phone under my pillow and jumped out of bed, trying to look normal. My face must have been livid, but I made a mistake. A carelessness that would cost me everything. I didn't close the Bible app. Later, when night fell and the house was silent, my door opened. No knocking, no warning. My brother appeared there, standing in the doorway. He didn't have his usual smile. His eyes, once innocent, were now cold, fixed, he knew. The air grew dense, heavy. A suffocating silence enveloped us. Then he spoke. "What were you reading today, Hamza?" The question was whispered, low, almost gentle, but it hurt more than any scream. I froze. Time has stopped. All the blood seemed to drain from my face. My heart dropped like a stone to my stomach. I couldn't say a word. I stood there trying to swallow back my panic. "I saw something on your phone," he said in a flat voice, as if reporting something trivial. He took a step into the room. "If I tell Baba, he'll beat you, won't he? Maybe he'll even send you away." My hands trembled at my sides, hidden in the hem of my shirt. "I'm not doing anything wrong," I managed to stammer, my voice cracking like a thread about to snap. "Reading that book is haram," he retorted, anger in his eyes now. It wasn't just a harsh tone. It was contempt, pure and naked. "You know you're playing with fire, Hamza." That's when I realized. In his eyes, something had changed. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper. Maybe fear, maybe repulsion, maybe the conviction that I was a living threat to our faith, to our family's honor. In that instant, I lost my brother. I threw away all my pride. I put aside my position as an older brother, as a respected teacher, and emotionally knelt there before him. I begged. I asked him not to tell, to give me time, to try to understand. My voice was barely a whisper, distorted by fear and sadness. He looked at me as if he no longer saw a member of the family. He was a stranger before him, and he knew he now had power over me. "I'll think about it," he replied before leaving. He closed the door behind him. The dry sound of the doorknob became a sentence, and the silence that remained was worse than any scream. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep a wink. I stood still, staring at the ceiling, as if each crack was an omen of what was to come. Fear became a presence. It wasn't just psychological, it was physical. I could feel it in my chest, like a stone preventing me from taking a deep breath. With every step in the hallway, every creak in the house, my entire body reacted. It was like waiting for the storm, knowing it would come, and that would take it all away. At that time, there was no more theological debate nor search for answers. There was only one thing: dread. And in the midst of this icy terror, a single sentence escaped my lips, repeated softly, as if it were the last thing holding me to the world. "Jesus, if you are real, help me. Jesus, if you are real, help me." The explosion happened shortly before dawn. The door was not opened. It was broken into. He hit the wall so hard that the whole house shook. And then my father came in. He didn't look like himself. The red face, the eyes, different, full of something that had never looked at me before. Anger, but also disappointment, shame. He knew. My brother had told everything. And the first word that came out of his mouth was like a punch to the soul. "Infirm." The word cut through the air like a blade. "Unfaithful. You have become an infidel," he shouted. "You dare bring this filth into my house? You spit on the Quran, on Allah's holy book." I tried to respond. I tried to say it was just curiosity, that it wasn't rejection, that I still loved our family. But the words were like leaves carried away by a hurricane. He didn't listen to me. There was no more room for dialogue. I didn't want to hear anything. He lunged at me and without warning slapped me hard across the face, the dry sound cutting through the air. My ears rang and stars exploded in my vision. The pain was intense, but the shock I felt was even greater. Before I could compose myself, he turned in a fury and knocked all my books off the table onto the floor. There, scattered across the floor, were the Islamic texts I'd been studying and those online Bibles I'd secretly begun reading, all jumbled together in a mess that to him was pure dishonor. He said nothing more, leaving, slamming the door as hard as he'd entered. After that day, everything changed for me. I was forbidden to leave the house. My cell phone was confiscated, tearing away my last connection to the outside world and the truth I was beginning to uncover. The room that had once been my secret refuge became my official prison. But what hurt most wasn't the physical isolation, but the cruel silence that surrounded me. No one spoke to me. I'd pass my brothers in the hallway and they'd look away, as if I were invisible, a ghost unworthy of attention. My mother would leave a tray of food at the door, give it a gentle tap, and disappear before I could even open it. I'd see the shadow of her feet beneath the door, a silent reminder that I'd been erased, rendered a non-person within my own home. It was as if I'd died, and they, the mourners, only my body was still there, alive, a reminder of the shame I represented. I spent 3 days and nights in that absolute solitude, an isolation so painful it hurt more than any physical blow. I was no longer being attacked, but the torture of silence was merciless. The violence of the slap had been an explosion of emotion, but the silence was a cold, planned sentence. I overheard a conversation between my father and neighbors, where he said I had a spiritual illness, that he as a concerned father was disciplining me, keeping me at home to cure me and bring me back to the right path. To them, I was a lost soul, a restoration project. The irony of this situation was almost unbearable. They locked me away to save my soul, and yet something strange began to grow within me. A timid but real sense of freedom. The mask I wore had been ripped from me. The exhausting performance of pretending everything was fine was finally over. I no longer needed to lie to anyone, not even myself. And it was precisely in that darkness, on the 4th night of that confinement, that something happened and changed everything. I had another dream. This time I was in a vast desert, an endless plain of sand under a scorching sun that cracked the dry earth. I was alone, with a terrible thirst that burned my throat and cracked my lips. I felt like I was dying. That's when he appeared, a man coming from afar, crossing the shimmering mirage of the horizon. He wasn't walking. He seemed to glide over the sand, and everything about him emanated a light so intense that even the sun seemed pale next to that brightness. I couldn't make out his face because of the bright light, but I felt a deep peace emanating from him, a calm that overcame the panic consuming me. He approached where I lay, knelt beside me in a gesture so humble it surprised me, and held out to me a simple clay cup filled with water. His voice was soft, calm, like the sound of running water, and it was as if the desert itself had come to life in that moment. "Drink," he said calmly, and I did. The moment the water touched my lips, it wasn't just my thirst that vanished. A surge of life coursed through my body, filling every cell with a fresh, vibrant energy unlike anything I'd ever felt before. When I woke, my face was wet. Silent tears streamed down into the darkness, but they were tears of relief, not despair. The next morning, I woke with unexpected clarity. That dream hadn't just been a comfort. It felt like a divine command. In my chest, a firm, unshakable decision had taken hold. I could no longer pretend. I couldn't simply run away. I needed to break with everything, abandon the entire system, the invisible prison of expectations, the web of cultural and religious lies that had shaped me my entire life. Fear still gripped my stomach, a cold, constant presence, but now there was a stronger force within me, a determination that kept me from backing down. Before my phone was confiscated, I had contacted a Christian through an online forum and written down his number on a small piece of paper, which I hid in the seam of my pants. That morning, while my father was at the mosque for Fajr prayer, I managed to grab my mother's old cell phone for a few minutes in the kitchen and sent a single message. "I'm ready. I need help." The reply came almost immediately with an address, a safe haven for people like me. All that remained was to figure out how to get there. I waited for 2 days, the longest and most tense of my life. I watched every movement in the house, timed my father's trips to the mosque, feigned a submission and a regret I didn't feel. And then, on the 3rd morning before sunrise, the perfect opportunity presented itself. My father left for morning prayer, and in complete silence I grabbed an old backpack and stuffed only a change of clothes inside. Barefoot so as not to make a sound, I walked through the house like a shadow, carefully opened the back gate, which creaked ominously, and ran. I ran like I'd never run before without looking back, driven by a fear that burned in my chest. Through the dark streets and nearly empty alleys, my heart pounded as the cold early morning air burned my lungs. I ran until I could run no further, until I found a main avenue where I hailed a taxi. Panting and nervous, I gave the driver the address I'd memorized. When the car stopped in front of a simple house with no sign on the door, before I could react, the door opened. A woman appeared with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. She smiled at me and said, "Welcome back, sister." It was in that moment that my entire body gave in. I collapsed in her arms and cried like never before, sobs that shook my body, releasing months, years of fear, loneliness, and pain I'd kept bottled up. For the first time in my life, fear disappeared. I was safe. I had nothing. No money, no family, no future, no honored name I'd once been given. But I had peace, and that peace was all I needed. Life in that shelter was peaceful, but laden with an almost palpable emotional weight. I spent the first few days mostly locked in a small room, with nothing but a mattress on the floor and a Bible on a small table, a new world I was still beginning to explore. During the first few nights in that place, sleep seemed to elude me for a different reason. It was no longer the fear of punishment that robbed me of rest, but the profound sadness that invaded me. I clearly saw my father's furious face, my brother's contemptuous gaze, and my mother's silent, sad expression. I thought of the years I had taught with such passion and sincerity, a book I no longer believed in. The weight of my old life felt like something I needed to learn to carry, even if it was painful. Guilt visited me at night, like a silent thief creeping into my room to steal the peace I had just found. Questions hammered at my mind. Was I a traitor? Had I abandoned my people, my family, my God? Or was I finally being honest with myself for the first time in my life? There were no easy answers, and the weight of these doubts was crushing. But in that silence of the house, in the slow, patient rhythm of the days, something inside me began to heal. I developed a routine. Every morning, I read the Gospel of Luke. I confess I didn't always understand everything. Many passages confused me, and my old religious objections still surfaced, questioning every word. But there were times when something inside me broke, in a good way, in a way that allowed me to grow. One day I came across a phrase from Jesus that paralyzed me. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I stopped there, rereading that phrase 5-10 times. Then something inside me burst open and I began to weep uncontrollably. All my life I'd been trained to hate, to see the world divided into us versus them. Christians, Jews, Hindus, atheists, all were in some way enemies or souls condemned to the fire. And there was Jesus, telling me not just to tolerate, but to actively love those who hated me. Those tears were a collapse, the collapse of the last pillar of hatred I hadn't even known I carried within me. I'd grown up hearing that Christians had corrupted the scriptures, that Jews were enemies of Allah, that non-Muslims were just fuel for hell. This was the geography of my spiritual world. But the Jesus I encountered in that Bible spoke a different language, a language of mercy for the outcast, forgiveness for sinners, and healing for the wounded. And I longed for it with all my might. I longed for this mercy, this forgiveness that had seemed impossible before. I began attending secret Bible meetings held at a pastor's house, along with other ex-Muslims who, like me, had fled their families. There were frightened teenagers, almost children, and men in their 40s, some with death sentences or fatwas hanging over their heads in their home countries. We rarely spoke of the past. It wasn't necessary. Our gazes already held everything that needed to be said. There was a silent solidarity, born of the same pain and the same hope. We were the forgotten, the rejected, the cursed by those who should have loved us most, our families. But there, for the first time, we were truly free. One such night, the shelter's pastor sat with me on the front porch. He was an older man, a man of few words but with a quiet, steady strength, the kind of presence that makes you feel safe even when everything inside you is shaking. We sat there for a while, silent, listening only to the sounds of the night around us. Then he turned to me and said calmly, "Hamza, I know you're still searching, and that's okay. But Jesus isn't waiting for you to purify yourself before coming to him. Nor is he waiting for you to understand everything perfectly." He paused, and when he continued, his words shifted something inside me. He's already made the first move. He's already done everything for you. He just wants your heart. I stayed quiet, just taking it in. The idea that I didn't need to earn anything, just receive, felt so new, so liberating. The pastor continued in a soft voice, almost an invitation. "If you want, we can pray together. No pressure. It's just an invitation." I looked into his gentle eyes, then into the darkness before me, and slowly nodded. I inclined my head, a gesture I'd made thousands of times in my life. But this time was different. There was no obligation, no fear, no performing for a distant and strict God. For the first time I spoke without fear, not with those Arabic words I'd memorized, but with what came from my heart, still broken and hesitant. "Jesus," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know everything about you. I have more doubts than certainties. But I believe. I believe that you are the Son of God. I believe you died for me, for all this mess and confusion I have inside, and I want to give you my life. Please help me, heal me, guide me." I took a deep breath and spoke the last word almost in a whisper. Amen. In the silence that followed, something inside me broke. It was as if a dam had broken and a warm wave invaded my chest, driving away the cold and anxiety that consumed me. It wasn't just a fleeting emotion, it wasn't just relief. It was a real, profound peace, the feeling of finally being home after a long, hard journey. I looked at the pastor and saw that he was crying too. He smiled and said, "Welcome to the family." That night I slept with this peace in my bones, a true and rare peace. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of learning and, perhaps more importantly, unlearning. I had to relearn how to think, how to trust, how to speak without filtering everything out of fear of blasphemy. My body had to adapt to not stiffening with fear every time the adhan, the call to prayer, echoed through the nearby mosque. Those echoes brought back difficult memories, deep traumas. One day, before a small group in a hidden house church, I told my story out loud for the first time. My voice trembled, my hands sweaty, but I said it all. The verse, the doubt, the escape, the dreams. That same week I was baptized in a nearby river. The water was icy and my body trembled from the cold and nervousness. But when the shepherd pulled me out of the water, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. A weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. The weight of a lifetime of trying to please, of fear, of shame. I was no longer Hamza, the teacher of the Quran, nor a prisoner of others' approval. I was simply a child of God. And finally, I was truly free, without a shadow of a doubt. It had been 2 years since I left home. 2 years since I last heard my father's voice. My mother had called me only once in that time. Just once. The call lasted 10 seconds. "You are dead to us," she said, her voice hollow and distant. "May Allah watch over you." And then the line went dead. Sometimes these moments return in nightmares. I wake up sweating, hearing recitations from the Quran echoing in my mind, feeling the weight of the life I left behind trying to suffocate me. But these dreams no longer have control over me. They've become mere echoes of the past, shadows that fade with each passing day. Today I spend my days doing something I never imagined possible, living my truth, helping others who, like me, need to find a way out of that same invisible prison. Of course, I still have doubts, I still fight internal battles, and I still deeply feel the pain of losing my family, a pain that accompanies me daily. But I'm no longer driven by fear. Now I'm guided by love, a love that doesn't demand perfection, that reached me in the midst of my confusion, my wounded pride, a broken identity I didn't even know how to rebuild. It called me to itself. My name is Hamza. I used to be a Quran teacher, but today I follow Jesus Christ and I'm not ashamed of it. This is living proof that true freedom often requires abandoning everything we once thought was safe and familiar. What about you? Have you ever experienced a moment when your deepest beliefs were questioned? From which city or country are you following this journey? Share your experience and location here in the comments.